I was pouring my morning coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. Nothing unusual, just the usual flurry of notifications. I glanced at it out of habit, already planning my first sip. But then I saw the name. Owen Blake. I hadn't heard from him since I left Portland years ago. We were neighbors back then. He was just a shy, bookish teenager, always riding his skateboard too fast down our quiet cul-de-sac. Why would he message me now? The message preview read, "I'm so sorry about your parents." My stomach flipped. I set the coffee down. Slowly, I unlocked my phone and opened the message. There was a video. A shaky recording. Title: Claire Harper's Funeral, St. Jude's Church. I froze. The play button blinked up at me like an eye daring me to blink first. I tapped it. The screen lit up with the familiar archways of St. Jude's. Autumn leaves swirled around the chapel steps. Inside, rows of mourners sat in solemn silence. I recognized the organist, Mrs. Duval, from my childhood piano recitals. Her music hadn't changed. The camera panned to the front. A casket, framed by lilies and white roses. Next to it, a photo, my face. Smiling. That photo was from my college graduation. I'd worn that same blue blouse because it matched my eyes. My heart began to thud. Then I saw them. My mother, sitting in the front row, her face twisted in grief, draped in lace and pearls. My father, holding a crumpled handkerchief, rose slowly and approached the podium. His voice cracked. We did everything we could. Claire was bright, kind, but sometimes life is too heavy for one heart to bear. Gasps echoed around me, but they weren't from the video. They were mine. He wiped a tear, closed the paper, and stepped down. Behind him, my sister Naomi leaned her head on Mom's shoulder. I knew that posture, the one she used whenever the spotlight turned her way. The screen went black. I stood still, phone shaking in my hand. My knees bent before I realized I was sinking. I dropped into the kitchen chair and hit play again. Once, twice. The same words. The same image of me, dead. But I was there. Alive. Sitting in my pajamas. In my small Toronto apartment, where the maple trees outside glowed golden in the morning sun. What kind of twisted game was this? I opened my mouth, but the words came out as a breath. If I'm dead, why am I still breathing? I looked around my apartment as if it might offer answers. The quilt I'd sewn last winter draped over the couch. The worn novel I'd been reading face down, half finished. The smell of cinnamon still lingered from the oatmeal I forgot to eat. Everything was real, tangible. But the world I came from, the family I once had just buried me, or pretended to. And somehow, the entire town of Portland had played along. For a long while, I just sat there, quietly listening to the hum of the city through the open window. A siren passed by somewhere. A seagull cried near the waterfront. Life moved on, but I was standing still. There's something unsettling about realizing you've become a ghost in people's lives before you ever had the chance to say goodbye. I sat in a corner booth at this cafe I'd been frequenting since I moved to Toronto. Same window view. Same red mug. But this morning, the coffee tasted different, hollow. Like it had passed through me without landing. I opened my laptop, fingers trembling slightly as I typed into the Oregon Vital Records site. Claire Marie Deverett. Search. My screen paused for a second. Then the result blinked up at me. My full name. Birth date. Status. Deceased. Cause of death. Auto accident. International. Documented by consulate. Date, July 12th, 2020. I didn't blink. I didn't move. It felt like every cell in my body froze, like my lungs had stopped remembering how to take in air. My first thought was, how did they pull this off? My second was, why now? I clicked on the certificate preview. A digitized copy of the death record loaded. A few fields were redacted, probably for privacy, but it looked official. The seal. The registrar's name. Everything in order. A clean, legal lie. I reached for my coffee but missed. My hand hit the side of the mug and it tipped, sending a streak of dark liquid across the tabletop. The barista glanced over. I waved it off with a shaky smile. Sorry, clumsy. She smiled back, polite, unaware that just across from her stood a ghost who'd just found her own death certificate. I tried logging into my old email, the one I'd kept open for bank alerts and medical appointments. Login failed. I tried the password again, slower this time. Account closed due to user status, deceased. My throat tightened. It wasn't just a symbolic thing. They had gone through every step to erase me. I pulled out my phone, dialed the old number my parents used to call. Disconnected. Next, I tried Aunt Rosalind. She was always the black sheep like me, but still showed up every Thanksgiving with her candied yams and sarcastic remarks. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. Third time, the call wouldn't go through. Blocked. I stared down at the table, feeling the warmth of the coffee fade beneath my palms. The cafe buzzed around me, couples chatting about weekend plans, a child clinking her spoon against a cup, someone laughing too loud in the back. But I felt completely detached from it all. Years ago, I had walked away from Portland to reclaim my life. I changed my number, moved across the border, found peace in obscurity. But I never expected them to take it one step further and declare me gone for good. And the worst part? They'd picked the one thing I feared most to justify it, an accident overseas. How poetic. How easy to grieve a daughter who vanished somewhere far enough that no one could ask questions. I scrolled back to the search page, hoping for some mistake. But it was still there, my obituary, a name carved in digital stone. Claire Marie Deverett. Deceased. Age 30. No surviving spouse. No children. Just like they'd always wanted. I leaned back, staring out the window. A pair of pigeons fought over a croissant crumb on the sidewalk. The sun was just starting to break through the clouds, casting long shadows across the pavement. My phone buzzed. It was a message. Just one line. Are you really alive? Owen. I read it twice. Then a third time. For the first time that day, I didn't feel numb. I felt fire. Your sister's speech at the funeral is going viral, Owen said, his voice crackling through the speaker. She said you were complicated, but hers. I sat on the couch in my dark apartment, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop screen. I'd muted the TV, but the silence wasn't comforting. It felt like the whole room was holding its breath with me. I clicked the first video Owen had sent. The title read, A Sister's Goodbye, Naomi Harper's Eulogy. The video began with soft music and shaky handheld footage. Naomi stood at the front of the chapel, hair perfectly curled, black dress tailored to perfection. She looked solemn, poised, like she belonged in that role. Claire was always complicated, she began, pausing just enough to look emotional. She felt things deeply, sometimes too deeply. But even at her worst, she was mine. A few scattered sniffles from the crowd. Naomi dabbed at her eye with a tissue that somehow didn't smudge her mascara. Her voice trembled, but not quite enough to sound real. I tried to understand her, she continued, and I hope, wherever she is, she knows I never gave up on her. I felt my jaw tighten. Naomi never tried to understand me. She never had to. From the time we were little, I was always the one behind the curtain. Every birthday party? I planned it. Every science fair project? I built it. Naomi just smiled for the photos and took the trophy home. I scrubbed forward through the video until the camera panned to the front row. My father raised a champagne flute, not a glass of water, not a candle, but champagne. To the daughter who made us proud, he said. And everyone toasted. I paused the video. They weren't mourning. They were rewriting. Owen had sent more clips, shorter ones now, spreading across TikTok and Instagram. One showed a montage of pictures from my childhood set to some soft piano cover of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Another was Naomi, standing outside the church, telling reporters how grief had restructured her outlook on life. I rolled my eyes and kept scrolling. Then I saw it tucked into the corner of a slideshow photo. Naomi, in a white wedding dress. Dad at her side, smiling. The date stamp, 3 months after my supposed death. She got married. Without me. And no one even asked where I was. The comments were the worst part. So sad. She was so young. Naomi is such a strong soul, sending love. Can't imagine losing a sister like that. Rest easy, Claire broken heart. I gripped the sides of my laptop so tightly my knuckles ached. This wasn't just grief. This was performance. A neat little tragedy that made Naomi a survivor and my parents martyrs. Their public pain bought them sympathy, applause, maybe even donations, for all I knew. But no one thought to question the story. No one asked where the body was. No one wondered why I wasn't buried next to Grandma Margaret. I opened the next clip and paused halfway through. There was a photo behind Naomi, barely in frame. It was my father again, sitting at a long table. He was signing something. Next to him, a man in a dark suit, handing over a pen. I leaned in, squinting at the blurry image. The page had lines. It looked legal, like a document. And near the top corner, barely visible, transfer authorization. My breath caught in my throat. What were they transferring? There it was. A certified death certificate, my name, my birth date, a polished lie in serif font. The government of Oregon had stamped me out like I was an expired coupon. No autopsy record. No family release. Just auto accident. Deceased. Neatly printed. Filed. Accepted. I kept staring at the screen while the printer in the corner of the Toronto Legal Aid office spit out another copy. Even the paper smelled official. You said you have documents? The advisor asked gently. Her name tag read Ariana, and she looked barely older than my sister, except there was no pretense in her eyes. Just focus. I nodded and slid the folder across the desk. Inside, my lease agreement from Toronto, 5 years of rent receipts, my work contract at the bookstore, utility bills, a scanned passport with stamps from Dublin and Vancouver, a faded prescription for migraines, even an expired grocery rewards card with my name. This is everything I've got, I said quietly. She flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowing as she reached the printout from Oregon's public record. You weren't just misidentified, Ariana said after a moment. Someone submitted this on purpose. I looked down at my hands. Yeah, that's what scares me. She set the folder aside and pulled up a new screen. You'll need a U.S. attorney. This is beyond identity fraud. This is systemic, deliberate erasure. That word stuck. Erasure. Not just death. Not just grief. But a decision. Like a redaction. As if someone looked at the messy parts of their life and chose to white them out. She slid me a card. Darren Lynn, Portland. Civil rights, identity restoration. He does consultations by Zoom, she added. But be warned, it's slow work. The system doesn't like admitting it made a mistake. I gave a small, humorless laugh. I wasn't counting on speed, just survival. A few hours later, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open, waiting for Darren to appear on the screen. I had changed shirts, put on a bit of mascara, and tucked my hair behind my ears like it might help me look more credible. When his face popped up, he looked exactly like someone I'd trust with the truth, early 40s, calm voice, warm eyes that missed nothing. I read the documents your advisor sent, he said after I finished speaking. Miss Deverett, this isn't common, but it's not unheard of. People have fake deaths to commit fraud. But it's usually the subject who disappears, not the family who buries her alive. I nodded, swallowing hard. We'll start with an affidavit. Sworn testimony. Then a petition to reestablish your legal identity in the U.S. But before we do that, you need to gather everything that proves continuous existence. Like what? I asked, though I already had a folder full of it. Photos with date stamps, bank statements, witnesses, social media activity. Anything that says, I was here. I never left. When the call ended, I didn't move right away. I just stared at the stack of papers on my table, documents, proof, fragments of a life too ordinary to fake. I began stuffing them into a manila envelope, sealing each layer with a piece of tape like it was sacred. Inside that envelope was my life, my story, my breath and bills, and every invisible act of showing up each day. This is everything I am, I whispered, sealing the flap. And everything they tried to delete. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. A streetcar rumbled past. I opened my travel app and booked the flight I'd been avoiding for years. One way. Toronto to Portland. No return. As I closed the screen, the last light in my apartment clicked off behind me. But I didn't flinch. Sometimes, to resurrect yourself, you have to walk straight into the grave they dug for you. The church looked exactly the same. Same stone steps, same wooden doors weathered from years of Pacific rain. Same bell tower that once signaled joy. Except this time, I wasn't walking in for midnight mass or a Christmas pageant. I was walking in for my own resurrection. I stood across the street with Owen, my scarf wrapped tight and my heart tighter. The sun was just starting to rise, casting that strange soft glow that only Portland seems to know, half memory, half fog. I remember singing in the children's choir, I said, eyes fixed on the stained glass window above the door. Naomi would lip-sync the high notes, and I'd always sing too loud. Dad said it ruined the harmony. Owen offered a short nod. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He had his phone out, camera ready, angling toward the entrance as guests began to arrive, most in black, some with those stiff, practiced expressions that said, I didn't really know her, but this is what we do. I leaned behind a tree, out of sight, and peeked at the scene unfolding. Naomi stood at the doors, dressed in sleek black again, flawless as ever. She smiled, hugged, nodded, directed people inside with the grace of someone who belonged in front of an audience. You'd think she was hosting a wedding, not a second funeral. She's got ushers, I whispered. There are ushers for my fake funeral. Owen didn't look up. Keep watching. This is good footage. I clutched the memorial program he'd swiped from a side table earlier. My face, my old senior photo, smiled back at me in grainy black and white. Claire Marie Deverett. Gone too soon. A brief write-up followed. Claire passed peacefully overseas. Per her wishes, cremation was handled privately abroad. There were no wishes. There was no death. There was only the choice to cut me out like a bruise on perfect fruit. My fingers trembled against the paper, but I kept reading. A list of those she left behind: Mom, Dad, Naomi, even Aunt Rosalind. And a final note: please no photos. The family requests privacy. They always hated messy pictures, I muttered. Especially the ones that didn't fit their story. The scent of lilies drifted toward us. Church lilies. Funereal. Too sweet. Too much. I took the long way around the side of the building, keeping to the hedges. The side garden was overgrown now, but I found the bench I used to sit on before Christmas rehearsals. I paused. The stained glass window to the left still shimmered the way I remembered, deep blues and purples that looked almost alive when the morning light passed through. As a child, I used to stare at it for so long I'd forget I was supposed to sing. It had once felt holy. Now it felt like glass pressed against a wound. From inside, I heard murmurs, clinks of heels on tile, and then my mother's voice. Please remind them. No photos of the family. We want to keep it dignified. I closed my eyes. Dignity. Their favorite word when burying truth under decorum. I stepped closer to Owen, who had just tucked his phone back into his coat. He raised an eyebrow, waiting for instruction. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just whispered, slow and steady, get your camera ready. This is going to be the only real photo they'll remember. And I took one step closer to the building that used to feel like home, now the stage for my return. The priest cleared his throat. Let us rise for a moment of silence in honor of Claire Deverett. So I opened the doors. The wooden creak echoed like thunder down the aisle. And there I stood, in the same black dress I wore for job interviews and border crossings, facing a room filled with people who had already buried me. For a second, no one moved. Then heads turned. A murmur began. Some gasped. One woman clutched her husband's arm and whispered, "Is that?" My heels clicked slowly against the stone floor. Step by step, past the pews, past the fresh lilies, toward the altar where my photo sat, framed in white lace and surrounded by candles. Naomi saw me first. Her jaw slackened, her spine locked straight. Her pearls shifted as she instinctively brought her hand to her neck. Behind her, Mom, Teresa, turned. Her face went pale, then something strange. She blinked 3 times, like she was short-circuiting. And then, like a stage actress who never missed her cue, she fainted. Gasps rippled through the room. 2 guests rushed to her side, fanning her, murmuring. Naomi didn't move. Not at first. I reached the front. I stood directly beneath the photo they'd chosen of me, ironically one of my favorites. My senior year portrait. Confident smile, red sweater, a little hope left in the eyes. Hope that maybe family meant something. The priest, a man I didn't recognize, stepped forward. "Miss," he stammered. "Are you?" I nodded. Very much alive. "Thank you." Naomi took a step forward then, finally finding her voice. "Claire? What are you doing here?" I tilted my head slightly, scanning the pews. Faces I hadn't seen in a decade. Former teachers. Our old neighbor from Aspen Lane. Even Mr. Goldstein, who used to scold me for climbing his fence. They all looked at me like I was Lazarus. Or worse, like I was a scandal interrupting their brunch plans. "I heard I died," I said clearly. I came to correct the story. The room fell utterly silent. Owen stood discreetly at the back, camera trained, unmoving. We had agreed, no edits, no filters. Just truth, raw and real, in real time. Naomi took another step forward. "Claire, this is not the time." I gave her a long look. "Isn't it?" You've had time. Time to plan this. To curate grief. To throw this event. I looked down at the memorial program in someone's lap. I mean, the font choice alone. So elegant. Someone near the back let out a nervous laugh, quickly silenced. Mom groaned on the floor as two women tried to lift her. Dad, Gregory, stood up slowly, his posture still military straight even in age. Our eyes locked. He didn't look shocked. He looked caught. I took a breath, centering myself like I used to before debate finals in college, the ones where my throat would dry up and my hands would shake. But I'd speak anyway. I always did. This funeral? This fake moment of collective mourning. I paused. It's a performance. Naomi's voice cracked. You don't understand. Oh, I do. I turned slightly toward the guests. You're here because you were told I died. That I passed peacefully overseas. That I was cremated in some nameless clinic far away. I stepped closer to my framed photo. But the truth is, I've been living in Toronto. Teaching. Working. Existing. All while my family filed a fake death certificate and deleted me from their lives. Phones began to rise. One by one. Quiet clicks. Videos recording. Why would they do this? Someone whispered from the side. I didn't flinch. I looked directly at my father. His expression didn't budge. Let's talk about what you buried, I said, my voice soft but firm. The air cracked open, not with a sound, but with the weight of collective realization. I didn't cry, because evidence doesn't need tears. I pulled the folder from my bag, plain, navy blue, unassuming. But inside it was my life, the one they tried to bury under flowers and fake eulogies. I stood at the altar, and for a moment, all I heard was the faint buzzing of lights above me and the creak of someone shifting uncomfortably in a pew. Then I held it up, my passport. This was stamped last month in Toronto, I said. Before that, Dublin. Before that, Mexico City. I flipped through the pages. Every country I entered while, supposedly, 6 feet under. Someone in the second row gasped. I opened another envelope. Here's my lease agreement for the apartment I've lived in since 2021. And my employment contract from St. Michael's College. I passed the pages to the nearest guest, who took them with trembling hands. He passed them down the row without a word, as if they were sacred documents. And just for fun, I added, here's a copy of my 2022 tax return. Federal and state. I've been paying taxes while being legally dead. That's got to be some kind of bureaucratic record. A small ripple of nervous laughter. Someone coughed. My father stepped forward from the third pew, his voice taut and commanding. Claire, this is not the place. I cut him off. You already gave your speech, I said, turning to face him fully. Now it's my turn. He stared at me. For once, he had no script in hand. I turned back to the crowd. If any of you are wondering how this happened, how someone can be erased from public records while still breathing, ask my family. Owen panned the camera slightly to capture their faces. Naomi's lipstick had faded at the corners. Her eyes darted toward the doors like she was calculating exits. Claire, she started. I raised a hand. Don't. You had your spotlight. I unfolded another document. This is the filing from a Portland-based law firm, Hollins and Ward. They declared me deceased after an alleged auto accident overseas. No police report. No embassy notice. Just a convenient line on paper. I paused. Want to guess what happened next? No one answered. I held up another paper. The family trust was reassigned. Everything I was meant to inherit redirected. The beneficiary listed here. I looked straight at Naomi. You. She was trembling now. champagne flute in hand. Not drinking, just gripping it like it could anchor her to the floor. You didn't mourn me, I said slowly. You inherited me. A hush swept the sanctuary. And then, like a spark, someone in the back stood up. She's telling the truth, a man's voice rang out. I got a postcard from her 2 years ago. Said she was in Quebec. I thought it was weird, but it was her handwriting. Heads turned. A few gasps. Someone whispered, "That's Mr. Ellis, her old English teacher." Naomi's hand twitched. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered at her feet. I didn't flinch. Maybe you all believed I died, I said. But the bigger question is, why were you so quick to believe it? I could feel the weight of every gaze. Not pity, not yet outrage, just realization. And that sometimes is heavier than grief. Naomi cried real tears this time, but they weren't for me. They were for the life she was about to lose, the image, the comfort, the lie she'd so carefully built on my absence. Outside the church, the wind had picked up, tugging at my coat as I stepped down the stone stairs. The guests had filtered out in stunned silence, forming tight clusters on the lawn, their whispers sharp as broken glass. Camera shutters started clicking, first hesitant, then steady. A young woman with a mic stepped forward, her press badge catching the sunlight. "Miss Deverett," she called. "Can you confirm, were you aware of your legal death prior to today?" I looked at her squarely. "I became aware a few weeks ago." That's when the unraveling began. Another reporter jumped in. "Are you pressing charges?" I let the question hang for a breath. "I'm not here to destroy them," I said. "I'm here to reclaim myself." Behind me, Naomi stood at the top of the steps, framed by the church doors, mascara bleeding into the corners of her eyes. She wasn't pretending anymore. But the irony was, it was no longer the kind of grief anyone would comfort. From the edge of the crowd, a familiar voice called out, "Claire." I turned. Darren Lynn, crisp suit, leather briefcase, eyes sharp. We'd only spoken over Zoom until now, but I recognized his presence immediately, calm, capable, ready to act. He handed me a folder. "This contains the official motion to revoke your death certificate. It's been pre-filed. You just need to sign." The papers were warm from his hands. My name was printed cleanly across the top, alive in black ink instead of etched in stone. I held them tight. Behind Darren, Owen gave me a small nod, his phone still recording, still capturing the kind of moment that doesn't need editing. Guests began to back away from Naomi. I caught glimpses of avoidance, a shoulder turned here, an excuse made there. Some stared down at their shoes. Others whispered behind polite hands. The tide was shifting. Not because I demanded it, but because truth has gravity and it pulls. A framed photo had been left propped against a flower arrangement at the base of the stairs. It showed me in college, smiling under filtered light. Below it, the words in loving memory. I bent down, lifted the frame. For a second, I simply looked at it. Then I let it fall. The glass cracked clean down the middle. I didn't need to say anything. Darren tucked a pen into my hand. "You sure you want to do this right here?" I looked up at him. The sun was rising behind the church steeple now, casting long shadows across the grass. "Yes," I said. "They buried me in public. I'm coming back the same way." He opened the folder. I signed where he pointed. Across the lawn, Naomi clutched her coat, closed like it could hold her together. But truth doesn't care for fabric. I turned to Darren one last time, and the words came easy. "Ready to make this official?" "You can't sue for fraud," Darren said, "until you're legally alive again." I almost laughed, but it caught in my throat. The absurdity had stopped being funny days ago, maybe weeks. The world still turned, cars still honked outside, people still bought lattes on the way to work. But in the eyes of the state of Oregon, I was a ghost. His office was tucked into the second floor of a red brick building near downtown. Warm light spilled across the floor through the blinds. Boxes of old case files leaned against the wall like they were waiting their turn to be reopened. On the desk between us sat a stack of papers that made my stomach tighten. Resurrection, Darren said. Flipping through a form isn't the word they use. But it might as well be. What do they call it? A revocation of death declaration, he replied, glancing over his glasses. We need to show uninterrupted proof of life since the declared date of death. Travel records, pay stubs, lease agreements, witness affidavits, anything that places you in the world. I nodded. I'd brought everything. I was always good with records. That's what made this hurt worse, because I had never disappeared. They just made me vanish. He tapped one form. This one's called an affidavit of existence. You'll swear under penalty of perjury that you're alive. That's a wild sentence. He chuckled softly. It is. But you'd be surprised how many systems don't question a lie if it's written in the right font and notarized. I picked up the pen. My signature came out shakier than I expected. The silence settled for a while as he typed into his computer. I glanced at the clock on the wall, almost noon. Outside the window, the city moved on like it always had. I pulled out my phone to check messages. Another article had gone viral. Woman returns from the dead to reclaim her identity. Legal battle looms. I sighed. There was a strange comfort in the exposure. Being seen, even by strangers, was better than being erased. I think what's hardest, I said aloud, is how much I used to ask them to see me. I begged for it. Now the whole world sees me, and they still don't. Darren didn't say anything right away. Just nodded, eyes still scanning the screen. He finally spoke. Most people don't fake someone's death out of impulse. This was organized. You don't just forge a death certificate and transfer assets without help. My fingers curled slightly around the edge of the desk. They'll call it a misunderstanding, I murmured. A misfiled report. A clerical error. Anything but what it was. Intent is always the hardest thing to prove, he replied. But you've got evidence. We'll build the case. He slid another document over. Signed here. This is the fraud complaint. It names Naomi and your parents. We'll amend if others surface. I took the pen again. This time, my signature was bolder. Across from me, he reached into a file folder and pulled out a printed obituary, the one Naomi had read at the memorial. I stared at it for a long second. Then I took my passport out of my coat pocket and laid it beside it. There was 2 documents. One that killed me. One that kept me going. I don't know which of these is heavier, I said softly. Darren didn't answer. He just looked up from his screen, brows furrowed. Claire, he said, Naomi just hired a lawyer. It took me 3 deep breaths to walk up the driveway of the house I once called home. The concrete still had that thin crack running from the sidewalk to the porch, the one I painted over as a teenager, hoping no one would notice. Naomi had sat on the steps with a soda and told me I was wasting time. I should have taken that as foreshadowing. Owen waited in the car across the street, eyes lowered behind his sunglasses, camera resting on his lap. He didn't offer words of comfort. Just a slow nod. Maybe that was better. The door opened before I knocked. Naomi stood there, perfectly pressed, makeup flawless, like this was just another Tuesday. You came, she said flatly. I have legal right to access any documents bearing my name, I said, handing her the folder Darren had prepared. I know. She stepped aside, expression unreadable. I didn't fight the order. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and lavender wax melts, too polished, too artificial. The rug had changed. The curtains were new. But the way the light filtered through the windows was the same. Memory clung to this place like dust in the vents. I won't get in your way, Naomi added. Everything's in order. I said nothing. I moved through the rooms like a ghost retracing steps. The kitchen tiles were whiter than I remembered. The living room had the same coffee table, but the scratch I left during prom week had been sanded out. Upstairs, I opened the hallway closet. My old high school sweatshirt still hung in the back, like a forgotten relic. My fingers brushed the fabric. It didn't feel like mine anymore. When I got to the attic, I hesitated. The door creaked like it always had. A slant of afternoon light cut across the dust. There, near the far wall, was a plastic storage bin marked with black marker, C. I knelt down and lifted the lid. Inside, I found a stack of unopened letters. A scholarship award notification. A congratulatory note from the state's honor society. My refund check from a canceled semester abroad, still in the envelope, yellowed around the edges. Then there was the envelope. Thick. Sealed. Bank issued. I opened it slowly. A cashier's check. $40,000. Labeled, Education Trust Withdrawal. Dated 3 months after my death certificate was filed. I stared at the numbers until they stopped making sense. Behind me, footsteps. Naomi leaned against the attic doorway, arms crossed. You left, she said. What was I supposed to do? Let it go to waste. I stood, holding the check in my hand like a cracked piece of porcelain. That money was for my degree, I said quietly. You were gone. No, I turned to face her. I was erased. Her face tightened. We were just surviving. You don't know what it was like. Dad said. Don't. I cut in. Don't make him your excuse. We stood there in that narrow attic, surrounded by boxes and dust and years of words we never said. Her gaze faltered for the first time. You got what you needed, she whispered. Isn't that enough? I shook my head. No. What I needed was never in a box. I walked past her without looking back, check in hand, the weight of it more than money could ever measure. Case number 24 to 131, the clerk called out, voice crisp. Petitioner, Claire Everett. Status, deceased. A murmur rustled through the small courtroom, like wind through dry grass. I stood up slowly, hands folded at my waist, as if holding myself together. My shoes clicked softly against the floor as I made my way to the stand. Somewhere deep inside, the girl who once crushed a high school mock trial clapped nervously. But this wasn't a stage. This was my life. Multnomah County Courthouse wasn't grand, just simple and still. Pale wood, long benches, that faint scent of old paper and quiet battles. It didn't feel like a place for drama. It felt like a place for truth. Darren sat at the table beside me, calm as ever. His glasses reflected the morning light that filtered through the high windows. Across the aisle, Naomi's attorney, a sharp-suited woman with a pinched mouth, sat stiffly, her client absent from the bench. I raised my right hand, took the oath, and began. I've been alive, I said, voice steady but soft. Since the day they said I wasn't. I walked the judge through it all. The timeline. My passport entries. Employment records. Rent contracts in Toronto. Health insurance. Tax returns. Things that wouldn't exist if I were 6 feet under. I showed him the death certificate. Signed. Filed. Stamped. I showed the email from the state declaring my account inactive due to deceased status. And then I held up the education fund records. Naomi's name. The transfer. 6 weeks after I was gone. The judge listened in silence, his pen still. He had kind eyes, but unreadable ones. Naomi's attorney rose slowly. This appears to be an unfortunate bureaucratic error, she said, carefully. The family mourned her sincerely. There was confusion due to her sudden move abroad, lack of communication, and, frankly, a fractured relationship. The trust was executed in accordance with the understanding that Claire was no longer living. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned forward. If this was an innocent error, I said, why wasn't it corrected when Aunt Rosalind received my Christmas card 2 years ago? Why was my email flagged as closed due to death? And why, I held up the printed document, was the trust transferred precisely 43 days after that certificate was filed? The courtroom was quiet. Even the clerk had stopped writing. The judge nodded slowly, flipping through his notes. Do you have a final statement, Ms. Everett? I hesitated. Then I stood. I didn't die, I said, letting each word land clearly. I was deleted. Because I made them uncomfortable. Because I didn't follow their rules. And they found it easier to bury me on paper than confront who I really am. No one spoke. Even Naomi's attorney blinked, as if caught off guard by the bluntness. The judge leaned back in his chair. Thank you. I'll issue my ruling within the hour. I stepped down, my knees oddly calm now. Darren touched my elbow gently as I returned to our table. You did well, he murmured. I nodded. But I didn't feel victorious. Just visible. For the first time in years, I was being seen, not as a daughter, or a ghost, or a mistake, but as a person who had simply lived and refused to disappear. I didn't come to fight, my mother said, setting down her purse. I came to ask, what do you want? We sat in a little tea house tucked behind a bookstore on Hawthorne Boulevard. The rain traced slow, tired paths down the windows like the world had decided to cry on our behalf. Everything smelled of mint and bergamot and time we'd never get back. She was wearing pearls. Of course she was. Always polished, always composed. A performance with no intermission. I stirred my tea and said nothing. For a moment, we just sat like that, two women linked by blood, but separated by a silence that had grown too wide to cross. She finally spoke. Naomi, she had a breakdown. After the trust fund incident, after you disappeared. We didn't know what to do. She wasn't well. She was well enough to sign legal documents, I replied, not looking at her. It wasn't meant to be permanent, she said quickly. We declared you dead because it was symbolic. You'd left. You'd cut ties. Symbolic, I repeated. Is that what you call a funeral program, a death certificate, and a eulogy? Her hands fidgeted with her napkin. A crack in the perfect posture. I cried at your funeral, she said. You don't know what that felt like. I looked her in the eye. Did you cry because you missed me, or because the lie worked so well? Her lips pressed into a thin line. We do what we must for the family, she finally muttered. I had heard that before. As a child, as a teen, as the adult who packed her bags and left Portland in the rearview mirror. It was never a comfort. It was always a warning. I don't want anything from you, I said, pushing my cup aside. Not your money, not your name, not your sorrow. She exhaled, sharp and low. Then what are you doing, Claire? Why drag this through court, through the press, through the dirt? Because I need to look in the mirror every day and know that I am not you. The words hit the table like glass breaking, quiet but final. Her face didn't change, not at first. but something behind her eyes flickered. A pause. A ripple. She reached into her purse, pulled out something flat wrapped in tissue. Without a word, she slid it across the table. It was a photo. Faded but familiar. A picnic at Crater Lake. I must have been 10. Naomi was grinning. I had written on the back in crooked handwriting, "Best day ever. Claire." I ran my thumb across the corner. The ink had smudged. She always wanted that picture, my mother said quietly. But I kept it. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. She stood then, slow and controlled, like the way you leave a room you know you don't belong in anymore. "I hope you find peace," she said, her voice almost kind. "Even if it's not with us." And just like that, she was gone. Back out into the rain, her umbrella blooming open like a final curtain call. I sat there for a while, photo in hand, wondering how something so small could feel so heavy. Naomi messaged me just past midnight. "Come over." No press. Just you. No emojis. No extra punctuation. Just 6 words that felt more like an echo than a request. I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. A part of me expected a trap. Another part of me, smaller, quieter, felt something I couldn't name. Not hope, not closure. Maybe just exhaustion. I typed back, "Okay, 20 minutes. Her townhouse looked different in the dark. Not the filtered perfection I'd seen on her feed. The front porch light flickered faintly. A stack of delivery boxes leaned against the steps, one torn open, bubble wrap spilling out like intestines. She opened the door in a hoodie and leggings. No makeup. Hair tied back in a low, unbothered bun. There were dark circles under her eyes. "This way," she mumbled, gesturing into the living room. I followed her inside. The walls were bare, painted a cool gray that felt colder now that the framed quotes and curated prints were gone. Half-packed boxes stood open near the hallway. A dusty orchid wilted on the windowsill. No glam. No ring light. Just Naomi. She sat on the couch and folded her arms across her chest. "I'm not here to defend myself," she said before I could speak. I'm not sure I even could. I didn't sit. Not yet. She exhaled slowly. I never felt like I deserved any of it. Not the money. Not the praise. But once people started believing it was mine, I didn't want to lose it. Silence stretched. "You're pregnant," I said. Not a question. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. She nodded. "Yeah, it wasn't planned." "And you're alone." "Yeah." I finally sat down in the armchair across from her. The space between us felt years wide. I thought being the favorite meant I had to be perfect, Naomi continued. So I became the lie they wanted. I didn't know how to stop. I let her speak. That was new, me letting her take up space. She reached under the cushion and pulled out a small photo, creased at the edges. It was us. On the porch. I was 15, she was 11. We were holding melting popsicles, laughing. I remembered that day. It was one of the last times she ever asked for my help with something without pretending it was hers later. Naomi flipped the photo and handed it to me. On the back, in my old block handwriting, "To my sister, always." I didn't smile. I didn't tear up. "I kept it," she whispered. "That doesn't undo anything," I said. "I know." She looked smaller now, not just in size, but in presence. Like the mask had finally slipped, and what was underneath wasn't evil, just unfinished. "You think I came here to forgive you," I said. She didn't respond. But I didn't. I continued. "I came to remember why I left. And why I stayed gone." She nodded once, slowly. "I guess that's fair." We sat in silence for a long time. I glanced around the room. There were no awards on display. No photos of her wedding. Just blank walls and open boxes. Stripped of her audience, Naomi looked like someone trying to live a life she never built for herself. Before I left, she looked up. "Do you hate me?" I paused at the door. "No," I said softly. "But I don't trust you either." "Claire," Aunt Rosalind said, breathless through the static, "I found something." Behind Grandpa's old painting. I was standing in line at the pharmacy, clutching a bottle of ginger tea and trying to block out the newsfeed still cycling through headlines about the woman who came back from the dead. But her voice, the weight in it, it cut through everything. "Behind it?" I repeated, stepping out of line. I moved it while cleaning the attic. It fell off the wall. There was a slit in the back of the frame, like someone had slipped something inside. My pulse picked up. And there was a pause on the other end. Then, slowly, she said, "It's a will, Claire. Your grandfather's. Signed, witnessed, dated 6 months before you left Portland." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the pain in my chest reminded me to exhale. Rosalind's house smelled just like I remembered, cedar closets, old paper, and the faintest trace of lavender from the sachets she tucked in every drawer. The attic groaned as we climbed the narrow steps. Outside, the storm had moved in fast, rain slapping against the roof, wind creaking the frame like a warning. She handed me the envelope like it might crumble in her hands. I unfolded the pages with care. The ink had faded slightly, but every word was clear. I, Walter Everett, being of sound mind, leave full access and rights to the family property and educational trust to my granddaughter, Claire Everett, whom I believe to be most capable of stewardship. My name, over and over again, as if someone had taken the time to honor me on paper, even as everyone else was trying to forget I ever existed. "I thought they said there was no will," I whispered. Rosalind sat down on a wooden trunk, her shoulders hunched. "They told me the same. That everything was handled. That Grandpa never left instructions. But Claire, that wasn't all I found." She opened a shoebox nearby and pulled out a stack of letters, rubber-banded and worn. I took the top one. My handwriting stared back at me. I flipped it over. Returned to sender. Each letter had a different postmark. Toronto, Ottawa, once even London during my brief internship abroad. They were all addressed to the same house, my family's home. I flipped one open. It was dated the summer Naomi claimed I had disappeared. "Dear Mom, I'm okay. Please write back. I miss you even if I left angry." They never read them. Or worse, they read them and pretended they hadn't. "They said you stopped reaching out," Rosalind murmured, eyes brimming. "They told me you cut all ties, that you were unstable, ungrateful." My jaw tightened. They didn't just bury me. They buried the truth. We sat in silence as thunder rolled above us. I stared at the will in my hands, wondering how close I'd come to never knowing. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but it felt like gold. Not because of the money, not even the property, but because it proved, in a world of curated lies and strategic silence, that someone had once believed in me. Legally, unequivocally. In writing, downstairs, my phone buzzed. It was Darren. I picked up without a word, still staring at the page. "I just got your message," he said. "Claire, this changes everything." The courtroom was full by 8:30 a.m. I recognized some faces from church, others from high school, and a few whose names I couldn't place, but they all had one thing in common. They had come to see if the woman in the headlines was real. Naomi didn't show. Her lawyer stood stiffly behind his briefcase and muttered that she was recovering from a stress-related episode. The judge didn't flinch. I sat at the petitioner's table, a thin folder in front of me and Darren to my right. There was nothing else to bring. Everything I had left to prove had already been said. Funny, years ago, I sat in this very room during jury duty and thought justice was simple. The truth shows up. The lie falls apart. Gavel slams. Done. But I know better now. The truth doesn't walk in wearing a white hat. It limps. It trembles. And sometimes it arrives too late to fix anything but a piece of paper. The judge entered, his robe trailing slightly, his expression unreadable. "Let's begin," he said. Darren stood and delivered our final argument. The will, the death certificate, the timeline, the documents from Canada, the letters Aunt Rosalind found. It was all there, laid out like puzzle pieces someone had tried to burn and bury. When the opposing attorney rose, he didn't fight hard. He muttered about miscommunication, outdated information, an unfortunate clerical error that escalated unintentionally. He didn't mention Naomi's trust fund, or the letters marked return to sender, or the fact that I had lived, paid taxes, renewed my passport, and still been declared legally dead. The judge took a long pause before speaking. "In the matter of Claire Everett," he began, eyes scanning the room, "this court finds that the petitioner is, and has always been, alive." A few people gasped softly. "The death certificate issued in July of 2020 is hereby void. All associated property transfers under false declaration will be reversed, pending review. The inheritance named in Walter Everett's original will shall revert to its rightful beneficiary." Then he looked straight at me. "Miss Everett, by all legal standards, you never left us. Welcome back." My throat tightened. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just nodded. "Thank you," I said into the mic. Then I stood. "But I won't be staying." The gavel fell. The courtroom buzzed immediately, reporters whispering to one another, phones lifted to record, the hum of curiosity louder than the weight of what had just been restored. Outside, the wind had picked up. Portland's morning air tasted like metal, rain brewing somewhere close. The press surged as I stepped down the courthouse steps, microphones stretching toward me like vines. But I didn't stop. I didn't need a quote for tomorrow's news. I had already said everything that mattered. I paused only once, at the bottom of the steps. The sky had opened slightly. A sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds and fell across my face. I looked up. It was the first time in years that I felt entirely visible. I signed the papers on a quiet Thursday morning. The clerk didn't blink, just stamped, initialed, and handed them back like it was any other form. Except it wasn't. For the first time in years, the name on the line wasn't something I was running from or forced to defend. It was something I chose. Clara Wren. I'd scribbled it once in a high school journal, laughing at how poetic it sounded. "Claire is too heavy," I joked back then. Clara Wren sounds like someone who flies away. And now, maybe she was. Outside the registry office, snow flurried across the sidewalk, soft, brief, beautiful. I didn't rush to get out of it. My apartment was different now. Not bigger, not fancier, but brighter. There were little touches I never used to allow myself. A thrifted teapot shaped like a fox, a bookshelf with only books I loved, and a canvas print of Lake Ontario hanging above the couch. Owen sent it after my court case wrapped up. We hadn't spoken much since, just a few messages here and there. But the silence wasn't cold, just full. That afternoon, I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window. I took out a piece of paper and wrote, To the family who buried me alive. I'm not writing to forgive you. I'm writing because I don't carry the weight anymore. You built a story. I lived a life. And in the end, that's the difference between inheritance and identity. I don't need what you gave away, because I found something better. Myself. I folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer. It didn't need a stamp. It had already served its purpose. A few weeks later, I started volunteering at a youth legal clinic downtown. At first, I thought I'd feel out of place, too quiet, too scarred. But when I met the kids, some fresh out of shelters, some chasing paperwork they barely understood, I saw myself. Not in the details, but in the way they held their breath before speaking, afraid they didn't belong. I told them the truth. Sometimes, people will try to write you out. But paper doesn't decide who you are. You do. And they listened. Not because I had answers, but because I'd survived the question. One chilly morning in early spring, I posted on social media for the first time in 5 years. Just a photo, the surface of the lake, barely rippling, soft gray-blue under a pale sun. Caption: alive. Still. There were likes, comments, a few messages from people I hadn't heard from in ages, but I didn't respond to most. Some things are meant to be witnessed, not explained. Later that night, I pulled out a new journal. The pages were stiff, untouched. I stared at them a while, unsure where to begin. I am someone who has followed this story from the very beginning, from the moment Claire received the first video to when she walked out of the courthouse, giving herself a name, a life, and a voice. What bothered me most was not the betrayal. It was how someone could erase a person with just a piece of paper, with silence, with the pretense that everything is fine. But perhaps, from that, I learned an important thing. We don't need anyone to validate our worth. We just need the courage to live our truth, even if it means starting over. Sometimes family is not the place where we are most loved. But that also reminds me, we have the right to choose again, to choose ourselves, to choose peace, to choose a new name if necessary. What about you? Have you ever felt misunderstood or invisible in your own home? If you have ever experienced that feeling, I hope you know, you are not alone. Leave a line of your thoughts, or simply comment number 1 if this story has touched something in your heart. And if you love gentle yet powerful journeys like this, don't forget to follow the channel so we can meet again in the next stories of healing, resilience, and hope. Thank you for listening, for patiently going through the 16 chapters with me. See you again on a quiet afternoon with a cup of tea and another story. I wish you always live true to yourself, even if the world intentionally forgets who you are.